Well, Dad, earlier today I made a list of the top 10 reasons church conflict exists.
Yeah.
I bet you can
Is
start.
one of them because Steve Chaney's a member?
Say it again.
Is one of them is because Steve Chaney is a member of the church?
I don't know. He's not a member of my church. But I came up with a list. Number one, leadership conflicts. Would you agree with that?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Number two, doctrinal disagreements.
Maybe. I wish there were more.
Okay. Number three, moral and ethical failures.
Yes.
And can you guess what the number four issue would be?
Money, money, money.
Financial conflicts.
We
It is.
didn't prepare for this, Steve. You got to be really impressed.
Yes. So, financial conflict, it's a major issue in the church. It's things that cause problems when it's not done well, but it can be solved, which is why we're here today. We're talking about church finances. We're talking about some of the mystery behind it, some of the stigma behind it. And so we're glad that you are our listeners. You're listening today. My name's Jess Rayner. I'm here with Thom Rayner. And Dad, we have a special guest today that is on the podcast with us.
We do. His name is Steve Chaney. And I was about to say something snarky because I have such a good relationship with Steve. But I'm afraid the viewers and the listeners would not get it if I said, no, we don't have a special guest. We have Steve Chaney. But then somebody would think I'm snarky. I can say that to him because he's such a good friend. But not only of that, I mean, to have the founder and CEO of Chaney and Associates here to be able to ask these questions is an incredible privilege. It's an honor for me and you, and it's a privilege for our audience. He did some interviews some time back, and I went and recently looked at the responses or the downloads on that. It was one of the highest we had. And so I really just want him on here because I'm very self-serving. And,
okay.
But Steve, welcome to the banter. Glad to have you here, my friend.
Thank you. It's great to be here with both of you today and to see how we can help more churches.
I would like that. Hey, before we get into the content, I always say Chaney and Associates, they're friends in California, but they serve everywhere. And I just keep that before our audience that everything's in the cloud. You can serve anywhere and you're the best of the best. I never tell them precisely where your headquarters is located in California. Tell us. And I don't think you're near any fires, if I remember correctly.
No, we're not. We're near Sacramento, California. Our headquarters is in Roseville, California, which is north, sort of in between Sacramento on the way towards Lake Tahoe or Reno on 80. You'll pass our office. It's in a small little business park, and we own a couple of the buildings. About 80% of our employees, though, are virtual. They're all remote. And we have our leadership is here, though, in California.
Well, pretty much like we do at Church Answers. Jess and I happen to live near each other, but most of us are scattered all over the place.
Well, that's because I want to be near my mom.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
He loves her best, Steve.
That's okay.
Best or only? I don't know. Either word. I mean, it's synonymous in my book, but yeah.
So, Steve, let's talk about church finances. If there's a question that comes up about finances, ask Steve Chaney. If there's something that comes out about churches related to finances, ask Steve Chaney. We've said time and time again. In fact, our audience kind of says, yeah, we know Chaney. Yeah, let's do Chaney. Let's respond. Yeah. So let's talk about the stigma of church finances and why it really shouldn't be a mystery. So let's talk about the first thing that's being transparency. What do church leaders need to know about finances and transparency? We know that will increase trust among church members, but what would that mean? We've got a lot of pastors listening right now. We have a number of staff members and a healthy number of church members. But what does that mean for financial transparency? What are we talking about?
Sure. Well, I think for any professional, whether you're a church leader, a pastor, executive pastor, however you want to refer to it, or you're a CPA or you're a lawyer, architect, whatever, you're sort of, people receive you as the professional in your industry and you're supposed to know everything, right? And I think I had to learn this early on in my career. I was at Arthur Andersen back in the day.
What
I
was
was
that? They were the big what back then? How
They
many?
were the big CPA firm, big consulting firm. That's where Accenture came out of. They used to call it Andersen Consulting. I have a bad joke to say. I started my firm in 2002. That's when I left Arthur Andersen. But everybody left Arthur Andersen in 2002. So I didn't know who Enron was until Lou Dobbs told me who Enron was, and that was
What a
quite a
strange time.
journey. But you know what? It's an incredible journey. But here's one thing I learned from the partner that was in the Sacramento office. He said it's okay to tell somebody I'll get back to you. So what I find is wrong with transparency is everybody tries to give the answer immediately. Otherwise, they feel like, oh, they might know I don't know what I'm talking about, or they don't know they don't know finances in a church, and it's okay to say to somebody, "I'll get back to you on that," and then get back to them. Like actually respond to that person, whether you think it's a bad answer or a good answer. That's part of being transparent. Because you want to go into a situation with goodwill, but sometimes it's not the good answer or it's not a good result, let's say. So transparency doesn't matter what the result is, you're going to give the answer, right? So sometimes things happen in a church and the pastor will think, oh, I got to give them an answer right now. And that's the worst thing to do because you don't give up the best answer, right?
I've worked with a lot of pastors, including my son here. He happens to be my pastor, Jess Church at Spring Hill, Tennessee. And I'll say this about the finances of your church, Jess. They're as transparent as can be. You have been in some churches that were not transparent with finances.
Right.
Steve, do you run into that? And I guess it's such an obvious problem. If you do, is it a problem? Or maybe I should say, how do you respond to someone who's not being transparent to their congregation? Or does that even happen on your end, the CPA and the accounting firm?
You'd be surprised how often it happens.
Mm.
But here's the problem that I find mostly with transparency in financial areas, right? Is that people actually disagree with something else that's going on in the organization and then they make it a financial matter. It's sort of like the Judas effect, right? Like he said, why are we giving all this away to the poor? Why are we doing this? Why are you doing that? And really he just didn't like what Christ was doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then he threw it up. Well, we could have used that money for this. We could have used that money for that. And I say they want to really disagree with the leadership's vision and the approach of ministry. We've had this most recently, very large churches that go through a leadership change. All of a sudden now the finances are horrible, everything's horrible, but they forget the 30 years that they just came out of in the other administration, who they sort of worshipped and adored, and it was a mess. It was a hot mess, and then they come in the next administration to try to fix it. But because you changed the music, you changed the hymns they sing, you got rid of the piano, you get rid of this, now everything's going to sort of hell in a handbasket. And they don't want to really admit what was truly going on before. And so like we come in to fix mistakes like that. And you wouldn't believe what we're accused of. We don't know what we're doing. Everything's bad. Nothing's good. And it's really tragic because people lose sight of the vision of what Christ calls the church to do, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you get out of that? You just continue on. You just continue to be clear in your messaging, the approach, and you have to over communicate to get over that and that transparency. And then ultimately, once you do that, and you have to be, who are you being transparent to, right? Because you can't be totally transparent with the entire organization, but the board of directors, you should be extremely open with them and show them all the details.
Yeah, Steve. So, I from a pastoral standpoint, I'm thinking like you become a third party in this, which for you sounds like can be difficult at times. It sounds like you're becoming a mediator potentially, but taking the finances and bookkeeping and adding it as a third party. What I'm hearing you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, has the potential to help create unity in the church because it removes that, well, you're wrong, versus now there's a CPA involved, and so there's a third party involved. Do you see that? Do you see that after they work through some of these things at church, maybe going through through the stigma and the mystery, that when the CPA becomes begins to work with the church, that it actually can help create unity?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it becomes a factor of like, there's no political agenda, right? I don't know who these people are. I haven't been to church with them in decades, right? Just got to know them. And I'm just very much matter of fact, right? We know the law. We have a vertical in just churches. That's all we serve. And so therefore we have a deep competency in how to communicate and how to speak that. Like I just had an experience with a church in this regard. The prior bookkeeper, bank recs hadn't been done forever. According to the balance sheet, they had $20 million in the bank account. She was just checking off the checks, but she wasn't like reconciling it to the general ledger. So we come in, we figure this out, get a call corrected. Takes extra time though to do that kind of stuff, because the devil's in the details, right? So when we get a new client, everything's perfect, all is good, there's nothing wrong, it's all been reconciled, we see financial statements is good, and then I go in there and I'm like, wow, this is really bad. And then we take a couple extra months to fix it, right? And we get it under control, and then all of a sudden everyone starts to realize, oh wow, we didn't know that it was like this. And you just start to, from a perspective of no political agenda, supportive of the pastor. I'm only there to support the pastor and really then support the board, right? So if the pastor doesn't like me, you got a problem, because you got to have a good relationship with the pastor. And there's got to be synergy there. Like we cannot operate as somebody's CPA if we don't have goodwill. I always say chemistry is 90% of life. Or 90% of life is chemistry, and you got to get along. And if you don't get along, it doesn't matter what you can do. So ultimately, we serve that church, get it corrected, and then everybody on the board. Now we're going through the community, or let's say the people who attend the church, or the whatever we're working with. And now we get the board sign on, buy into it, and then we have to communicate that down. So it becomes important to then say to people, here's what we went through to get where we are today. But you also have to be very respectful, because guess what? Those prior bookkeepers are in the congregation, and people worked with them for 20, 30, 40 years, right? So then you have to be very respectful. We have to embrace them, to say, thank you so much for getting us to where we are today. You're part of that process. Believe me, they wanted to do right. They didn't know any difference, right? So you have to have a core competency. It's sort of like this. Nobody goes to the altar to become a CPA. A pastor went to the altar to become a pastor. I believe that I'm called to be a CPA and to serve churches. That's my calling. That's my ministry. But not all. The pastor, the senior pastor, doesn't have that. So, part of this transparency is also to get people around him who knew how to communicate his vision, buy-in, right? How to become that trusted advisor. Like board members want to think like they're going to push the agenda. No. They're a deacon to be a helper, right? To do stuff that they have a gifting to do to help them. But they're ultimately there to help serve the church and the pastor, not to lead him, right?
Steve,
that becomes hard. So
give us a little bit of your story, and particularly the Chaney and Associates story. I know Arthur Anderson's gone. Chaney and Associates is there. I'd like to hear just a little bit more, because you said something that I want our listeners and our viewers to get. You are exclusively churches. I mean, not only do you know all the things that CPAs do know, but you have a specialty that is very unusual. One of the reasons that Church Answers is incredibly excited to have you as a ministry partner is because I just don't know anybody who knows their stuff for churches like you do. So give me a little bit of the story about Chaney and Associates. Last time I checked, you were over 1,100 churches. I don't know where you are now, but just give me a little bit of that story.
Yeah, it's great. Well, when I worked at Arthur Anderson, I was actually the pianist for a very large church. That's how my wife and I met. She was the oboe player, I was the pianist. And the pastor
He was the what player?
She played the oboe, and I was the pianist for the church.
I've never known an oboe player before.
What a combo.
They're great. I love the oboe. And so we met there, got married there, had our children there, and Leroy Lebec was the pastor at the time when I did that. And he said to me one day, he came to the piano, and he said, "We need a CPA on the board." And he said, "Didn't you just become licensed?" I'm like, "Yeah." So I just started sitting in this boardroom, and it was a very large church. They had a large school at the time, accredited Bible college. And I constantly heard the pastor go and make comments of, "I wish I would have known that. I wish I would have known that." And meaning he would have made a different decision, probably. And back in those days, it was hard to get information, right? Because it was all just a lot of paper, a lot of process. And so anyways, long story short, sitting in those board meetings, the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, "What you're doing at Arthur Anderson, you're going to do for churches one day." And I didn't know what that meant, but 2 years later, started a firm in one day. Literally, that church became my first church. Now we have over 1,100 churches, and we do all of their accounting, payroll, financials, budgeting, everything. It's sort of grown from that. So, and then I became a speaker for the American Institute of CPAs at the time for cloud-based accounting. And they were interviewing me once for the Journal of Accountancy, and just speaking, I came up with the saying of the 4 R's. And I said, we get the right information to the right person at the right time to make the right decision. And we call it the 4 R's. And if we've done that, we've done our job, because it's not our job to make the decision, but it is our job to give the right information to that person to make the right decision. We do not control the pastor. That's what we do not want to do, but we want to be a resource. So Jess, when you mentioned earlier, I do a lot. What I say is I do a lot of counseling, financial counseling.
Okay.
I'm not as much a CPA as much as a counselor, and it's quite amazing because pastors and leaders don't really want to say they don't know what they're doing, right? And so ultimately, we have a deep vertical in this. We are one of the top producing firms in America for just the faith-based organization. We get a lot of offers to go into other organizations, and we don't, because we just don't want to create a vertical for that. And you have to know, like, we're not a typical bookkeeping firm. That's typically what you'd say. Well, you're doing bookkeeping. That's true. We do the accounting department for a church, the financial department for a church, and ultimately. But most bookkeeping companies will say, well, we do it for dentists, lawyers, construction people. We do it for a whole bunch. We do bookkeeping for a whole bunch. And then they don't get a vertical. They don't get a platform. And so we get really deep. Like, we know the taxation for pastors, for churches, financials, like how to do multi-site. We have become just a national leader in multi-site churches. We've been able to take the economies of scale down to 10, 15 cents on the dollar for costs of what it takes to do multi-site.
Oh, wow.
And
Can you pause that for a moment? I want to, I learn something new about you every time, Steve.
Yeah.
And I did not know that, number one, that you had become so proficient in multi-site. And I've never heard that amount that you just gave, that you have like an 85% reduction. That, I guess that's the inverse of 15%, 85% reduction in the overall cost with multi-site. Can you just push that just a little bit? Because we have a lot of multi-site churches that tune into this.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of multi-sites will have like a central operations, and then from there they open up their site. Well, could you just imagine having a site, and for administrative costs, all you'd have to do is have an internet connection? And that's pretty much it. All we do is literally add a cost center, which we call campus or a location, and it's literally fully set up and running. All the software is all generated. Everything is done. The whole budgeting process is done. The payroll is all set up in literally minutes. And that's what it takes to launch a campus. And then with our internet banking that we've set up, literally there's no analysis fees, there's no cost of services at all. So what I mean by economies of scale, so the bigger you get, the less you literally spend in accounting. One of our largest churches that we have, I've stopped counting how much we've saved them after almost $600,000 just in costs alone. And the economies of scale now, we're like, it's almost hard to believe how little of a penny like we get from them per dollar earned. It's becoming less and less, even like it's 0.075% of a penny now.
Oh,
Like
wow.
that's what they pay us. And we've not increased our fee in 4 years, because the reality of this is we could, I guess, if we were like a typical bookkeeper, break and fix. Like we don't want to fix anything because we want to charge you per hour work, right? That's not how we do it. It's 100% fixed fee. And the only way we make money is to make the process better and to leverage technology. If we don't do that, we would never be able to stay in business. So when you get a really good pastor and they go multi-site, the administrative burden, now you're just sharing your administration amongst greater revenue, right? That's the whole idea of franchising.
Jess, we got to get this word out more to our churches. You know that?
I know. And here's where I am just, you're hitting of something that's very important to me, because as a pastor, I'll say this often. I was like, we're not going to let the tail wag the dog. And what happens, I think, a lot in churches, you have policies, you have procedures, you have administration, you have finances. That, and again, I tell this to my leaders a lot. They're to support the work of ministry, not to direct the work of ministry. And so, you coming from a local church, you being focused on just churches only from an accounting standpoint, and what I hear your heart is saying, you want to enhance ministry. You want finance and bookkeeping to be something that is almost non-existent in a way that doesn't affect ministry. That, to me, you talk about building accountability, you talk about building trust, building transparency. All those things happen, but as a pastor, that excites me the most. Is that? I hear your heartbeat. I hear you saying that. I'm trying not to put words in your mouth, but if I'm a pastor, that's like going off in my head, like, ooh, that's what I want. Is that your heartbeat?
Yeah, absolutely. And it, like, that's the whole model, right? Like, for example, I don't know if I've said this to you before, Tom, but I'll do a little bit of a rabbit trail real quick. Jesus tells them, feed the 5,000, right? And he says, well, we can't do that. We don't have enough food. He goes, well, how much do you have? What do you have? What if they had said, we don't know? He had probably said, go find out and then let me know, right?
Yeah.
Said, oh, we got 5 loaves and 2 fish. That's sort of a form of accountability, right? That's sort of a form of accounting. Like, okay, he asked a question, we told him. He's like, okay, give it to me. And then he didn't give him all the 12, everything plus the 12 baskets. He blessed them as they needed it, as they handed it out, right? It's continued to grow. So what I say is, when you talk about the 4 R's, right information, right person, right time to make the right decision, that person in ministry needs to have an active, real-time access to their financials so they can make a decision right there. So when the Lord leans on them to do something in the immediate, right? When they say, what do I have? What do you have? They can answer it. They don't have to say, well, I have to wait 45 days till my books are closed. Or I've got to figure out, or it's wrong, right? Or here's the biggest thing is a pastor spending the building fund or missions and he doesn't know it. He thinks he has millions in the bank and he doesn't, right? That's a big thing. So what I'm saying for you is, to get back to your question, Jess, and your comment is absolutely true. You want to leverage process with technology. So here's another pitfall that churches have. They say, well, we've been having this person who does it for 20 years and she's amazing. And she probably is amazing. Okay. So let's just say that's true. That's all true. And she's doing a great job, but she's doing it on processes that are 20 years old. So software allows you to have a turnover of staff or a lot less, let's say, people that are trained in this area, because the software will do it for them. So now what we're telling churches is do a lot of dual roles. So you have a children's pastor. Like a pastor will say, I can't afford to hire a kids pastor or a youth pastor. Well, find a youth pastor who has some administrative duties, who can also help us with some of the financial matters, like, scan documents in or run a process locally, but then they can do all the ministry. So now you took an administrative function and you put it into ministry. So I don't think anybody should not have dual roles in a church. You should have some administration, you have some ministry. You should never be all administration.
Okay.
Because software can do that for you.
Okay.
I can see the gears turning in your head, Jesse, even as he talks.
Well, I'm just thinking, just in the short time we've been on this podcast, what I've heard, if a church goes with Chaney Associates, they're going to increase transparency, they're going to increase accountability, they're going to increase unity, and they're going to increase ministry. Just in this 25 minutes, we've learned we've learned what simply going to Chaney Associates can do for your church. And so, yeah, the wheels are turning, because the whole point of this episode we're in is, why church finances shouldn't be a mystery. I think for a lot of church leaders, it feels that way. It feels like this ambiguous. I don't want to touch that. I'm not supposed to get involved with it. If I touch that, it's going to just disrupt the cart. And so what you're saying is that, yeah, I mean, there might be a little bit of transition that takes place, but what you gain by getting a third party to start working with your church is way more than you ever anticipated. That's what excites me, Dad.
You know what I say about Chaney and Associates, and it's not limited just to the world of CPAs, accounting, bookkeeping, and finances, but it especially is. If someone says, I don't know if we can afford an accountant or CPA or bookkeeper, I tell them they can't afford not to. You said, you don't know what you're going to be missing. It is absolutely imperative that you move in that direction. All right, we're going to do another podcast that will be close to this one for those of you who are listening. And by the way, those of you who are watching on YouTube, thank you for the thumbs up, and thank you for continuing to watch us there. And for those of you on your podcasting app, thank you for listening. So, Steve, we're coming back with another podcast, but it won't be sequential. It'll be shortly after it. But wrap this one up for us and tell us anything we need to do, and then we'll come back to another one.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, ChaneyAssociates.com. We have a whole development team and conversion team that will just be there to answer questions, right? Because it's obviously a way that we can get to know you and support you. That's what we're ultimately here first to do, is support the local church and grow it. You might say, like, well, we're not a multi-site church. Well, guess what? We have a whole platform for brand new startup churches.
That one's incredible too.
Yeah, it's incredible. And you think, like, well, that could be very expensive. It's almost free at the end of the day. And considering what you can do. And if you start it off right, you just get a cheaper price or less than an expensive price the whole time that you're using us. So that's the way to go about it. Get in touch with us. We're here to help you and then get through those anxieties that people, wake up and keep themselves up at night. So,
yeah, I also think the first step is the hardest step, is just picking up the phone, sending an email. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, I don't know what, maybe just call, just email, just get a hold of Chaney Associates, just see what they could do. You don't know until you ask. And so that would be my encouragement, no matter if you're a brand new church, your church like mine that's getting into the toddler stage or at the infancy stage, or you're a long-term established church, just give them a shot. Just ask. Just see what could happen, because they bring so much to the table, and it might be the solution you need. I know often, Steve, when we talk about you guys on the podcast, we talk about how you actually provide opportunities for a leader to get more time back. You get the local church, you're real help, and you're there giving the pastor, the local church leaders, time back. And so not only time, but also potentially money as well. So, Steve, thank you so much for being on this podcast.
Yes, I want to add one thing before you sign off.
Sure.
I want to give a shout out to our Global Methodist partners as they continue to reestablish themselves in a new denomination, probably the fastest growing denomination in the United States in 2025. Many of them will be looking to start afresh in some areas as they become a new denomination. Okay, all of my Global Methodist friends, hear this: Chaney and Associates. Chaney and Associates. Can you repeat that with me? Chaney and Associates. I'd love to get one of my denominational partners that I absolutely love, the Global Methodists. I'm not limited in Global Methodists, but I'd like to get them started as they begin a new denomination. So back to you, Jess.
Yeah, no, see, this is great. I'm looking forward to our next podcast. We're going to talk about, simplifying things for church and their finances. And so thanks again, Steve, for being on here. If you're listening, if you are one of our listeners, again, give us a like, give us a thumbs up. If you're on YouTube, comment. Throw in some comments. We want to see more comments on YouTube. Ask questions. We're here for you guys. Again, That's why we exist. Church Answers. We know you have questions. We're hopefully we're the ones out there that are giving you some pretty good answers along the way. So thanks so much. We'll catch you on the next podcast.